Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of the Distributed Republic webcast. It is fantastic to have you all here with us. We have got a really interesting topic today. We're going to try a slightly different formula than what we normally do, but we've also got new graphics, new ways of being able to do things. So, it's the first one that we've had this year. So that's amazing. So, yeah, it's a little bit new, a little bit on the innovative side. For those of you who haven't joined us before, welcome. We've got a community called Distributed Republic. It's all aimed at supporting people to be able to learn more about Web3, the Metaverse, AI, XR, all of these emerging technologies that so many organizations could be leveraging, so many people could be leveraging, but often we find that that knowledge is gatekept, and we want to completely smash down the gates. I'm going to introduce Lauren in a second, who is going to be co-hosting with me today. But the way we generally tend to do this is we try our best to minimize jargon. We try to keep our answers short, simple, easily to understand. It's not always the case that people do pick up what we're saying straight away. So we do have some useful terminology guides. So if you hear anything that you're like, that doesn't sound like a real word, or it could be that we've made it up. It would not be the first time. But it also could be that there is terminology related to it. So if you go into our terminology guides on distributedrepublic.xyz and then to documents and infographics, we have one for Web3, we have one for AI. You can pick up on all of the information, words, different things that we might be saying that you want to know a bit more information on. And as always, do add your comments and questions into our comment section. We can see them, they do come through. We probably won't answer them as we're going through, but we will have time at the end to be able to go through unless there's something that's particularly pertinent, in which case we will jump on that as well. So that's housekeeping sorted. We are going to be going through a fantastically interesting subject today, which is harnessing digital identity for social change. So I'd like to introduce Lauren. Well, actually, I'd like Lauren to introduce yourself and give us a little bit more information about you, the area of interest in this and your journey in this so far.
Yeah, well, it's been quite the journey and happy to have met you along the way, Jamie. Thanks for having me. And a pleasure to meet all the friends here in the community. So my background is in fashion. I've been in the industry for about 15 years, working as a creative across like global fashions capitals, including New York, London, and most recently Paris. And I actually came to Web3 during COVID. I experienced a lot of challenges in fashion design that included things like plagiarism, lack of pay, and just kind of waste in the fashion industry. And as much as I tried to search for other professions, I love what I do and I love fashion. So then I started to search for solutions to try to find how do we improve these issues for the industry as a whole. So I started in Web3. I call it the gold pill. And just went on this crazy journey ever since. And that looked like founding the first Web3 fashion label back in 2019 called ALTERRAGE. And it was really about how do we use these technologies to improve the fashion creation process and how we wear fashion. So yeah, a bit about me.
And a little bit of context, let us understand the hat. We can see the AR earrings as well. Give us a bit more info.
Yeah, this is a phygital combination. So we got these earrings, and so these were something we created about, I want to say 4 years ago, and we're the first NFT digital only earrings. So really good evidence that digital garments, digital jewelry can be as loved and cared about as a physical piece. So that was, I think, kind of the main takeaway I had from that. And then this hat is actually made of upcycled labels to represent the waste in the fashion industry and how we can now digitally upcycle it into the digital space.
Amazing. So you've got lots of AR technology on your filters. See people never realize, but I've always got AI filters on my one. So my eye contact is all done by a software called NVIDIA Broadcast. And what you can sometimes see is I look away and come back and you'll see that the AI helps you make that eye contact, as well as doing the blurring of the background. So we're really representing ourselves and the digital identity elements of what we're doing at the moment. So yeah, quite an interesting combination to both have those filters on. So I am going to jump in with this kind of first question to start us going. I know we're going to go for a bit more of a conversational based than question answered, but definitely useful for giving a bit more structure to our conversation. So I think a really good place to start, and I'd love to kind of get your insights on this. What are the key principles of digital identity, and why is it becoming increasingly important in our digital world?
Yeah, I guess I have 3 words that I would just use to describe it in my perspective. One is global, another one is like interoperable, and then the last one is like this idea of freedom and connection. So, context, I'm a fashion designer. I am not a tech person. So I naturally try to like speak in a way that's really simple, down to earth, remove, right, all these like complicated words. And so just my experience within like using digital tools, and then how do I connect what signals my identity across those, kind of comprises like those 3 words. I don't know. How about you? Do you have keywords when you think about key principles of digital identity?
Yeah, I think for me, when I think of the key principles now, it's this whole idea that you're no longer just managing a physical identity. You have a digital self, and that digital self can either be closely aligned to you, it might be further away from you. There might be various different versions of yourself within that online space. It might be a way of being able to explore different identities as well. I remember reading a lot of research around people being able to explore different sexualities and different genders through, first of all, through using a digital identity to be able to do it, to see if it's comfortable, to test out how they feel online within that. And it's really this exploration where we're starting to see this cultivating of 2 worlds and 2 people, or multiple worlds and multiple people. And I find what's really interesting about that is that could be, like you were saying, very liberating, quite an interesting space to be able to be, but also some of the challenges that come with that. When I think about what's it like to have a second identity that is separate from you, and does that create challenges at all? Does that create mental health challenges? Because let's say, for example, you can represent yourself in a digital space the way that you would like, you can cultivate it in a way that's very curated, but in a physical world that doesn't line up. Does that create a bit of an identity split? And I think we're seeing that with a lot of young people at the moment, where they're trying to reconcile these different identities with often very little guidance how to do it. There's not a lot of sense making in the world. So yeah, I think that those are kind of where the key principles for me, or at least the key considerations come in.
Yeah, it's kind of like what's the
Yeah.
balance of like finding something authentic to you while still making something understandable. I know we're both like going through like some branding processes and learning, and that seems kind of like this thing to balance. How do you communicate your ideas clearly through your identity, make something that's impactful and recognizable? Like, so example, I've been to quite a few Web3 events this year, and I wear this hat basically as a signal. So someone's like, oh, that's Kahlo, that's Lauren. I know to find and talk to her about waste and digital fashion. But versus like these earrings, like I also use them mostly in the digital space. But yeah, I think aligning that can be complicated. And when we fractionalize ourselves too many different boxes, I think we start to kind of lose consistency and lose that authenticity that like we also need. So it's definitely a balance of.
Is that consistency for us, or is that consistency for other people? That's what I always find interesting, because
That's a good question.
I love having these different identities. And so from my point of view, being like human-centric innovator, the whole point of being able to connect those 2 words together was going, okay, yeah, I love doing training and facilitation. I love being able to be there helping people decode thinking, but also, sure, put me in front of a computer. We can do some incredible things with AI, VR, all of this kind of stuff. And what I find is people really find that difficult to reconcile, the whole idea that there's someone who has these multiple identities and more of a polymathical thinking rather than fitting neatly in someone else's box. I know when we've gone through exercises of visual identity and some of the amazing stuff that you can do of like decoding that aspect, it's a journey of self-discovery as well. We're never really that static. But it'd be good to kind of chat through a little bit around how you do some of that decoding around visual identity, and people understanding how to brand themselves from that visual perspective.
Yeah, and I think like what you talked about is like what you do, and so I'm also very similar. I've been fashion, I've been done, now this more like Web3 technical route, sustainability, pattern making, creative direction. So there's been kind of like a big range, even though it's within basically one industry. But I see it differently as like our identity and our essence, and what are these kind of like thematic words. And so like your human-centric innovator, that was yours, right? Yeah, like I think that describes you really well versus like you do trainings, you do all these different things, and that's more like what you do. And so maybe it's just less about focusing on those words and then more this transition to like the essence.
Interesting. There's a lot around gender that I think plays a role in that as well. When I used to do research for the Prince's Trust and we were developing STEM strategy there, we were looking at how to get more women into STEM careers, so science, technology, engineering, and maths. And we found that actually, from a male perspective, often describe things in terms of verbs, whereas women often describe it in terms of adjectives and adverbs. And the fact that so it goes from, guys, you will be doing this, to you will be a manager. So are you managing or are you a manager? And there's a different connection there. So I suppose, yeah, it's quite interesting to kind of pick it up in terms of title, but also in terms of those actions of doing. I'm going to move it on to the next bit as well, because I think we've gone on a nice conceptual bit. And I also want to be able to bring it into a bit more nuts and bolts, because for me, I think one of the most important aspects of digital identity that doesn't get spoken enough about, and people have a challenge being able to get their head around, is around self-sovereign identity. So I suppose it'd be good to you from your perspective to get, what do you think is self-sovereign identity? Why is it important, and how can it empower individuals to manage their own digital identity?
Right. Yeah, this is definitely a total shift in mindset of how our culture currently works. We put a lot of trust and reliance and responsibility into like centralized platforms like Meta, different social media platforms, to basically manage the back end and all the responsibility of how we interface with the platform and with others. And so it's really this shift of like taking ownership and taking responsibility of your assets, and that therefore just really having that control back, whether it's about data, whether it's about what you want shared, whether it's about the platform goes down tomorrow. I remember once like WhatsApp went down and the whole world was like, where's WhatsApp? Where's WhatsApp? So like these things
They were
can
sending via
happen.
text messages because they didn't have WhatsApp
Yeah.
to do it.
Oh my
So
God, I hate
Facebook
texting.
Messenger had the biggest amount of traffic it ever had in years and years that week.
Like finally we know what we need to do for our strategy. But yeah, and so it's been also something I've had to relearn about, even like owning a wallet and crypto. Like I've learned the hard way of being hacked, of like, oh hey, like I should have maybe taken some more responsibility to like educate myself and learn about how to really take ownership of like what I own. And so yeah, I guess like the solution for that comes with education, but also just seeing the people around us do it. We're very like socially influenced. So I guess it just takes those initial leaders to teach and to pioneer the way of like, how do you really own something and why does that matter? To then give that incentive to the rest.
Definitely. One aspect that I think was really interesting there was lots of interesting aspects, but one that kind of touched me is we almost borrow our digital identities at the moment. We don't really own them. You know, when you're doing a Google sign on, you are essentially going, hey, Google, verify who I am. And that it doesn't just happen from our social media platforms. A lot of that comes from also, our governments and our industries and stuff like that. Is we rent our government we rent our identity almost from our government, from passports and everything like that. And for me, one of the most important aspects of self-sovereign identity is not just how we show up online, but also how it changes our impact on the state. And the fact that everything at the moment, if you're, for example, if you become stateless, then all of a sudden you have lost all of your identity. There's no borders to be able to cross. There is no documentation that you can have that's valued. And if somebody takes that documentation, there's nothing you can do about it. Whereas self-sovereign identity is about that decentralized network to ensure that you keep that ownership, that you have responsibility, and it follows you, not because of some other institution giving you the permission or giving the verification for it. And the reason that works is because through decentralized platforms, we can do that verification. We can still make sure that there is authenticity. We can have that security. And I think that that's a really empowering future that we're looking at. So I don't know what do you think from that decentralized identity perspective?
Yeah, and even like I think it's because we're still on the first level of like digital. Like, so I think a couple years ago, I living in Paris, I went back to London. I was kind of living between the two places. My passport was stolen, and so then I got stopped at the border and like was basically blocked and like unable to cross because I didn't have the physical piece of paper. And it's been the same in France of like needing a notarized birth certificate physically. And so I think, yeah, we're still on, which I guess like physical is pretty decentralized. So, so we do have that ownership there, but we don't have the communication trustlessly between different parties that need that information. But a place that's doing a really good job is Estonia. I was recently there for a conference, and yeah, it's quite amazing what they've done. They've just really addressed digital, and almost everything is digitalized. It's easily transferable. So that would be, I think, a place to look as far as who's doing it already.
I mean, I'm glad you brought up Estonia because they are, when it comes to tech and the implementation of technology, they are beyond anywhere else in the world. Although it is a heavily centralized system, the whole idea of that you can look at all of your data, you can see who's accessed it. So let's say you've gone to a doctor, you've moved place, you want to be able to move the files across to the new doctor. You have the power to be able to do that. And not only do you have the power to do that, but you also have the power to be able to go, and I don't want this doctor's surgery to be able to look at the data anymore. And you can also see who's accessed, what data when. So, you can check that it's all been authorized usage. And they have a policy from an Estonia perspective, which is that you should only ever have to give a physical piece of documentation over once. And after that, you should never be asked for it again. So once it's been scanned, once it's been checked in, that document should never be needed to be asked for from an institution again, which is a time saver, being able to do your voting online, even to the point of Estonia being able to have digital citizenship anyway. The fact that you can be a digital citizen of Estonia and use certain banking, certain services that they offer is completely far beyond anything else that anyone else is doing in the world. But they did it because, they wanted to be able to make sure that they were at the forefront of this, and they have done some incredible stuff on that spaces, which I think kind of leads nicely into our next area, which is, what are the challenges and advantages of using blockchain technology to manage and secure identities? You were saying a little bit about being hacked earlier on, so I suppose that very much falls in a nice little leeway to this conversation.
Yeah, learn in a painful way. But yeah, it kind of goes into what I've said of like, we're still on digital, especially for the fashion industry. Like, we use digital tools in like construction and production, but in the creation process a bit, but it's still like very much tangible because it's probably a very tangible industry.
And explain what you mean by on digital to people as well, because on digital, I understand where you're coming from, but other people might not.
Yeah, so I mean, using just digital programs, like, so an example would be pattern making. In a lot of like ateliers and like studios, it's by hand. And so that means cutting like a physical piece of paper. And then like digital tools, something like Clo3D or Optitex are just like 3D digitization, but have nothing to do, right, with blockchain and decentralization. So yeah, I mean, like interfacing with the blockchain and with crypto is not easy. It comes with risk. Every time, like someone enters crypto, you're told basically don't invest anything you're not willing to lose. So it's still like a difficult thing to interface with, especially with someone who is not native to technology or doesn't feel comfortable. And I'm still personally like learning and trying to feel more comfortable with interfacing and with creation of NFTs, for example. Saving my work on the blockchain is still like getting easier. It's definitely changed and improved. But yeah, and so that would be a challenge for sure. But advantage, I mean, I can speak from my own perspective. So when, as a designer, you go to look for jobs with companies, often a lot of times you show your portfolio. And so you don't have any control over they can share it like by email, because at this point everyone has to send it digitally. And I've had like some cases where I see my work like in the front of a store window 6 months later, or walking down a runway 6 months later, and it doesn't feel good. And it's definitely, there's not a lot you can do about it at this point. And also fashion is kind of notorious for this. And so now with blockchain, right, I can store all my projects on chain, and I can say, I made this thing at this time, and use that to pursue action or not, or yeah, it just gives you a lot more ownership and provenance over your own work.
I think that ownership bit is a really interesting developing area. When I look at California and what they're doing around being able to have your driving license on the blockchain, you know, having your birth certificate on the blockchain, you know, these are all tying in that digital identity to this new kind of technology and being able to store it in a decentralized way, because there is the verification there. And you know, we were talking about ownership in terms of your work, but also I think the way that we look at NFTs at the moment is very much surface level. You know, people have been using it to do images and clubhouses and all of this kind of stuff, and that's great and it's a good start. But the way that I see NFTs moving for the future is there'll be a mortgage contract. You know, it will be your registration to your car, things that you want to be able to have tradable, but you want to be able to be stored decentrally, can still have those legislations, and they can be automated contracts that are there, you know, using that smart contract technology. And another really interesting bit that you said, and I think that people don't think enough about, particularly when they are entering into these Web3 spaces, is blockchain. You know, once you're learning to use it, you know, you're going to make mistakes. There's things that are going to happen when you're saving, when you're trying things out. But what concerns me sometimes is that the whole point of blockchain is it's immutable, right? That you can always, that thing's saved there forever. So if you do something that you didn't intend to be able to do, you can't exactly delete it, because that's the whole point of having the distributed ledger. And there's a lot where I think people have put things onto blockchain systems where they haven't thought, oh, I've made a mistake here, or there's nothing I can do about it, or is this the kind of data that I wanted to put on there to begin with? And I think that kind of shows a bit of a shape in changing world, and it goes back to, once again, what you're saying around education and the systems in place. You know, there's a lot there that needs to be developed to make it an entity for more people.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's go on to our next one. You know, a bit of a self-indulgent one, this one. In which ways can AI enhance the management of digital identities, and what ethical considerations should be taken into account? Did you want to start on this one, or where you go first? I'll let you take the first step.
Okay. Yeah, I always have some examples, but in the context of my space. So, right, like I said, tech becomes less scary. But so recently there was a Met Gala, and there were some images that came on social media and Instagram, and they were of dressed celebrities that weren't there. So I'd say that's a pretty big concern as far as identity, AI. And we've just gotten to the point of where it's getting so good so fast, which is great as far as like being able to use those tools when we create, to help with ideation, to help with realism. But on the other hand, like, how do we now protect and like really show when it's us? And so that's why pairing it with something like blockchain makes so much sense, to then create these identities that are verified and proven. But I'll let you build off that.
Yeah, I know. I love that bit. And I think that this is where we're probably seeing that the capabilities of the internet get pushed to the full extent, because it wasn't designed to be able to do these kind of systems. It wasn't designed for the level of AI generated content in this world. You know, it was very much designed as a person to person interaction. And I think you do need to, if you are going to look at implementing AI from a digital identity perspective, you need to be able to have something like blockchain to be able to back that up, to verify, because we are going into a reality now where we're questioning our sense of real. Everything that we perceive goes through a lens of, is this real, is this not? And we've seen this with deep fakes, fake news, you know, AI generated content. We can be in digital spaces, and as these things continue to develop as well, you will have AI entities that are almost indistinguishable from people in digital spaces. So I design a lot of metaverse worlds at the moment. We're really kind of getting to the point now where we can have AI avatars that are in that space that you can interact with as if that was another human being that's there. I suppose, and the term that I quite like for it is synthesian. This whole idea of AI citizens that you have that are, there's an economic impact that these AI entities are having as well. And I suppose once again that ties into you as an individual, the terminology cognitive digital twinning. So the whole idea that with enough information that we can create an AI version of you. And I use this all the time. I've got it as a little chat bot to answer questions. So I've got an AI that's trained on my social media every 24 hours. And what happens is after a workshop, I go, yep, if you want to be able to talk to me, that's fine. Drop me an email. However, if you want something that's quicker and instantaneous, here's the little link to my AI. Ask them the question because they've got all of this training on me as a person. And it should give you a response that has probably the things that I find important included within it and the same kind of writing styles. So this whole idea that we're cognitive digital twinning, that we are starting to, potentially copy and multiply ourselves, and whether that's a good thing, the ethical considerations that come with it. Like if you produce let's say your AI, your cognitive digital twin produces a piece of work. Did you create that piece of work or did it create that piece of work? If you then go and sell that digital twin to someone, does that mean that you're able to do that? If that digital twin, does that make a second income for you? Are you entitled to that? What if that digital twin commits a crime? Are you responsible for that crime because that's an AI based on you? And I'm sure people are all happy when they have
the dark
things
twin.
like, yeah. What is the good things? People are like, yeah, I'll take that extra salary. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, are you willing to take the prison time for it as well? Well,
Wow,
all
I
of a
would love to
sudden,
see a movie about this. Has this been created? Maybe AI will create it.
Yeah, it's a little bit Black Mirror, but it's definitely the considerations and conversations that we need to be having, because we are essentially going to move into a world, and we already can see that happening very quickly, a world that's underpinned by AI. And sod the internet not being designed for AI to be able to be in that situation. Our economy is an industrial economy. It wasn't designed for a digital world. And we're going to have to do a lot more to be able to go, well, what does it mean when we can have all of this economic and productivity benefits, but what does that mean for people living in that society? So yeah, don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I don't know. A lot to digest. But
there was a lot there, all in a very short space of time.
I think it's interesting. I'm trying to pick it apart.
Yeah. Let's go into our next question then, which is how can digital identities be designed to foster greater inclusivity and representation of underrepresented groups? And just as a note before answering that, if anyone's got any comments, questions, do feel free to add them, and we will continue to go through those at the end as well. Love your insights.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll just keep continuing through my lens in fashion. And so I attended, I want to say 5 fashion schools. So that's a lot of tuition money. I then just to get to work in a luxury studio in Paris, it took a lot. It took a lot of time that I know a lot of people don't have, a lot of money that really creates a big barrier to someone who wants to work at a place like LVMH Caring, which is where I had finally ended after all these years of just trying to fight my way there. So I think there's now this big movement that's happening with digital fashion. And so I think maybe the perspective of it can be kind of gimmicky. I'm wearing digital earrings. Is that fashion? But there's all these this new generation of creators that are coming out. And it's been really interesting to foster and work with them because everyone has a different perspective. And I think it will help fashion as an industry to become less incestuous and more inclusive and more diverse, because it brings in people from all different backgrounds, all sets of knowledge to create a product that is a piece of our identity. And so I'd say, digital tools have really helped to do that. So for example, now someone can go on YouTube and learn Clo3D and become a fashion designer this way, right? You still need the network. Unfortunately, we still have the human component, regardless of digital. So you still need connections, you still need to put in the work and understand like aspects of fashion design that are part of the craft. But I'd say now like that barrier to entry is a lot lower. And there's just like, it's a super exciting time to start working in fashion and fashion design because there's so many problems to solve, but then there's the tools that we can actually use to solve them. So.
Very interesting. Yeah, I suppose when I'm looking at the digital identity, I have a slightly different lens on it, where I think the fact that we have so much information about us within the digital spaces gives an amazing opportunity for personalization and tailoring to the individual. Quite often, what we've seen is everything, we have societal norms, we have a baseline of what people are expected to be and how they're expected to show up. And if you don't fall within the middle ground of that bit, you fall on the extremes. The world isn't designed to be able to do that. With digital identity, and particularly if I pair that with something like AI, is we can tailor things like learning content to the individual very quickly. Let's say we're talking from a neurodiversity perspective. What we can do is go, well, this is the way that this person learns. This is the way that this person digests information. This is the way that they like to be able to experience that kind of education. And then all of a sudden, tying that digital identity with AI, we're able to make sure that that person is actually receiving an education that works for them. And I think that that's one of the things with our industrial economy and our industrial education and our industrial identities is, in the Industrial Revolution, they tried to fit the person to the identity. You're basically formed as a machine and you're part of an assembly product line. And therefore, everything they're trying to do is trying to turn you into something that's a little bit mechanistic. You're essentially filling the gaps in machine capability. Whereas the digital revolution and a digital workforce and a digital education needs you to be the complete opposite side of that, because the technology is good enough that it doesn't need you to be a machine anymore. It doesn't need you to fill the gaps of machine capability. Machines can do that. What it needs is you to do the things that are inherently human and involve critical thinking, creativity, empathy. And that takes a different kind of design of person, and that is where I start to see this inclusivity and representation coming in, because those points of difference, those different lived experiences and the authenticity that comes with it, that's really what we value in a digital world. And I hope that that's something that we start to see as we have this mindset shift, is also how digital identities then become that more inclusive representation across a broader range of people, rather than just making you into the machine that can that work in the industrial era.
Yeah, and definitely like kind of like this segmentation of like who you are professionally versus who you are personally. Like personally, I've always had a hard time separating them. Like I've always combined, and I've noticed that's like not the norm. And I know exactly like what you're saying about like this education system that prepares you to be this cog in a machine. You're essentially placed to work. And it's just a really big shift now that's going from like time to value. And it's really hard to like wrap your head around, like if you've been professionally working for your whole life, because you're in a system, the system works a certain way and you do your part in it. But now, and what I've been learning, like since none of the education I received was anything about entrepreneurship, it's really learning the opposite of that. And so it's like, how do you use tools to get now more things done, but aligned? And I don't know, I feel a shift. Like I feel that people are unsatisfied with the industrial society. I think that's like, that goes back to that like fragmentation of self. Because I think ultimately we don't want to be fragmented. I think like what we want to do different things, but we want to be one unified like self. And so I think like that is on its way with like this opportunity of technology, with the tools to kind of build anything, and with this like rise in entrepreneurship and self-employment that like especially we've seen since COVID.
Yeah. It's interesting. How would I feel about one unified self? I'm not sure if that resonates with me as much as it is. I very much, I suppose some people enjoy being able to kind of like know how they want to be present and feel that there's that version of themselves that's almost like the master copy, the master document. but I'm one of those that like I enjoy switching who I am for what situation. You know, I'm a theatre kid at heart. You know, there's so much being able to explore these different identities
True.
and
Yeah,
get to
all right,
know
all right.
ways
There's
of,
elements of this. I'm also a musician, and so I
yeah,
get that too. But I think when
yeah,
it doesn't work is when it drains you. Like if like
yeah.
you put on a mask or a persona that is really not aligned, and then you do that repeatedly, I think then that causes some dissonance.
Definitely agree with that, and that's what I see a lot with the workplaces. And once again, going for that industrial workplaces, is a lot of the time what people. I'll give you a really good example. When I worked at an organisation, it was a large foundation, a large philanthropy, and what they were, the organisation of that, or the whole mission of that organisation was, you know, making a more democratic world, fighting for this social inclusion. So it attracted lots of people who were activists, who were protesters, who were creative, who wanted to kind of do this I want to change the world thing. But the roles were actually all grant making, and that is a lot of admin, a lot of paperwork, a lot of due diligence process. So what you had is these people who had this amazing idea of how they were going to change the world, but they're doing something that kind of fractures what that was. They're like, I'm at the right place, I feel like I'm doing the right thing, but actually
Yeah,
you're doing the
it's the right
paperwork and you're
topic, but
taking
the
over.
wrong actions.
Yeah, and that's where I definitely can see that split sometimes come in, where the more you are in those situations where you're not doing the things that give you energy, but you're doing the things that involve stretching. If you do that over a long space of time, it's a fatigue. And it's not that it's a bad thing to stretch into those different areas, it's that it has to be kind of quite conscious, and you also have to be able to kind of go back to that safety, that stable place, that thing of the things that you enjoy, because otherwise, yeah, it just becomes quite fatiguing. um yeah, I think that there's some really good points there on that one. And it will be really interesting to see this shift to what could be a more inclusive and represented world because of digital identity. It also has the flip side possibility as well, which is, you know, a lot of these technologies perpetuate societal norms. You know, if we look at AI is very much a mirror. It basically takes all the data that we've given it and reflects that back to you. And my concern a lot of the times with that is that you can see it all the time using gendered language. So we often have male as the default human. And then when I see AI, I can see it coming up with him quite a lot of the time. I'm like, no, actually, that's the wrong name. That you've come to this assumption. And there's a great book that I'm reading at the moment, which is called Invisible Women, and it's all about the gender data gap. And I always think about that when we look at our AI systems, is we're basically still putting that gender data gap into these very powerful systems that are just going to continue to perpetuate that. So we have to be really careful about ensuring that AI is a tool, and digital identity are tools for inclusive representation and not just perpetuating the norm.
Yeah, I love thinking about it as a mirror. That's really interesting. And even like as a tool to like gauge how is humanity doing? How are we actually? Because we think we are one thing, but then the reality can be much different.
Definitely. You know, once again, we can look at it from a neurodiversity lens, we can look at it from a queerness lens, we can look at it from a gendered lens. You know, we can see all of those same biases. A really good experiment for being able to do this is go into ChatGPT and ask it to give you give you a list of 10 philosophers. And I would bet most people will get a list of white, male philosophers. But if you go, hey, can you give me a list of diverse philosophers, you know, over the last 100 years, then you'll start to get a bit more of that list coming through. But it's the fact that the default, because it really is just souped up predictive text, you know, everything that it's doing, it's looking for the most prominent factors. And because of how our society and the patriarchy has evolved over the, you know, and continue to be perpetuated over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, is we can still see that in our AI data that it's perpetuating that. So we have to consciously mitigate against that by looking at our algorithms and looking for the biases within it, because yeah, it can create a bit of a challenge when it comes to inclusion, belonging, and diversity for sure. So next question: what does a human-centric approach to digital innovation look like, and why is this critical for the development of digital identities? Lauren, what do you
Jamie,
think?
I think this is your question.
You
You
want me to
started
go
this one.
this?
You are the human-centric innovator, so
I wanted to make sure that I am sharing the air. Yeah. Cool. I think I'd go for more of a brief answer on this one, because I think it very much ties into what we were just saying there as well. That human-centric approach involves making sure that everybody has a place within this conversation. Like you said at the beginning of this, that you're not a tech person. I know you're actually quite technically minded and gifted as well. But I would also go that when we're looking at this, you don't need to be a tech-minded person to have a voice within the space of digital identity and AI. In fact, it's better if you don't, because at the moment we have just this kind of tech bro mentality of people that are designing the futures of these systems, and they don't think about the unintended consequences of their implementation because they have a very limited perspective of what that is. I remember, once again, this was in Invisible Women, which I was reading recently, and the one of the founders at Google, pregnant lady, she came to work and realized that they didn't have any pregnancy parking, and that it was really difficult with swollen feet to be able to get across the car park to go into the building. So she goes to the founder and CEO, and goes, "Hey, we need pregnancy parking." But you only have that if you have those variety of lived experiences where somebody can go, "Oh, I've experienced this. You need to think about that." And it's not that she was the first person to get pregnant at Google, but she was the first person with that influence to be able to go and say something and shape that conversation. And I think that when we come to our development of digital identity, we need to make sure that we are hearing from that variety of voices. And I don't care if someone is not a tech person, they still have valuable perspective, valuable insights. And the more we can get them involved, the better we will be able to see the results from this digital age. It's not just a nice to have, it's an essential aspect of evolving our digital identity spaces.
Yeah, and also, why are these, like, what's the core reason like your project is being founded? And that's why with like a lot of like the consulting I do, with like the direction I do with like creators and entrepreneurs, I ask, like, what is the why? Like, why do you need this project? Like, what is the impact you're trying to have? Like, so what, the origin of Facebook was created by white college male trying to get dates. Like, if we really think about the core reason that was created, it wasn't for connection. It wasn't for like the world to be improved. It was to get dates. And a really cool campaign that recently came out was by this cosmetic company called Elf. I think I'm going to get the name wrong, but it's called like Too Many Dicks, like as in Dick as in Richard, the name.
Yeah.
And so they analyzed like who comprises the top boards, like I think it was just the US. And so then it just showed like the disproportionate like amount of like women, anyone that's not Richard Dick on a board. And it's hilarious. And I like also bringing humor into it because it makes it like less scary. I don't believe in like this attacking way of activism. I think it can work, like if it's super urgent, which everything seems to be urgent these days. But I think like when you use humor, when you use connection, and like this is why I use fashion. I use it like for empowerment. And so when you use a tool like fashion to make change, like that is going to be impactful. Like everyone wears fashion. Everyone is trying to connect and say something with how they look. So yeah, that's a bit of a tangent, but
No, I liked it. Really interesting, but it just made me think, I haven't spoken to Dickie in a while. I'm going to drop him a text message just based on that.
See how he's doing on the board.
Yeah, I'm going to send him the link for sure. Cool. I think this will be our last question before we wrap up. So if anyone has any thoughts or comments they'd like to add, then do feel free to add those in as well. But how are Web3 technologies transforming the fashion industry, and what role does digital identity play in this transformation?
Oh, this question's for me, isn't it? Awesome. Yeah, I definitely love this question. I mean, if I break it down, like the core technologies that we're seeing in Web3 would be AI, 3D, blockchain, and also I've dabbled a bit in DAOs, which are decentralized autonomous communities. basically how do you work together in a more open, democratic, trustless way, trustless in the positive sense of using technology like blockchain. So those are the technologies. And so it's making fashion more connected. It's making it more accessible. It's reducing waste. And so I'm excited about how things are progressing. And that's why I'm in it. That's why I'm fighting for change in kind of the right way that are aligned with our values and aligned with like intention and whys and impact. Not just, beauty for the sake of beauty. I think that's kind of outdated, to be honest. And so that's how I see the industry changing. And what role does digital identity play in that? I mean, you can see it right now. You can see it as us speaking in a digital interface. I think it will just make, I don't know, the word multiverse is like coming to my mind. About like this like word I keep bringing up all the time, but like this idea of meta-reality. And so how do you have your identity across these different spaces? I was on LinkedIn yesterday looking at like some interesting posts about like how now I think Google Maps can like directly integrate AR filters. And so it's like, think of like now the digital layer on the physical is getting more and more real, more and more accessible. We don't just need to use Snapchat to wear a filter or Instagram. So I think it'll just be multi-layered, which will make it maybe more complicated, but more interesting. And we'll just have like, there's just more tools, I think, to play with. So what matters is what's your goal.
It's interesting thinking around that phygital development and the phygital aspect that's there, because people are going through a situation now where the walls between our physical and digital world are eroding so quickly they're almost indistinguishable from each other, and how people show up in a space where that digital identity and their physical identity are so closely related and also so separate from each other, which kind of loops back to where we were at the beginning. And it's really interesting you're saying about trustless. And I think that people at the moment, when we look at how identity works, is it's very much based on trust. We trust these centralized institutions with our identity, not always in a valid way. We've seen a lot of data breaches, and that's on a government level, that's on a social media level. There's a lot of trust that we place in as a someone who's having their identity protected by it, or somebody who's trying to access an identity from it. But actually with things like blockchain, we're moving into a truth society. It's no longer about needing to trust the person next to you. It's about there is an immutable outcome and distributed ledger there that means that we don't have to just base this on trust. We can base this on verifiable fact and evidence. And I think that'll be a really interesting mind shift for people to kind of go through, because it does mean that I suppose we're still finding out, does that make you more vulnerable? Does that make you less vulnerable? What does that mean from a societal context? And I think this is what I find really fascinating about decentralization, is we don't really know what the outcome of this kind of transition to decentralization and the distributed power actually means. But it could be an interesting journey to go there. Hence the name Distributed Republic, which I think is going to be where I'm going to finish it there, because I feel that was a nice bit to go on.
I agree.
Lauren, I want to thank you so much for your time, energy, and effort and insights. And we'll definitely be back again to be able to have another conversation. If you have any kind of recommendations of what you'd like that to be, then do let us know, drop us a message, and we'll see what topics we can explore next. But if you'd like to join the community, it's distributedrepublic.xyz. Lauren, do you want to talk also where people can go to find out more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, for now, the best place is probably LinkedIn. My name is Lauren Kacher. I also go by Colo, which is a amalgamation of my name for the digital space, for my digital identity. But yeah, so I'll have some things coming up soon that so be sure to add me there, and we'll stay in touch.
Amazing. That is great. I do recommend go follow Lauren and make sure to see what's going on, because there's a lot of interesting world and spaces that you're working. I was recommending you to some young entrepreneurs the other day that are interested in the AR fashion, so you probably got a few LinkedIn invites recently.
Perfect.
But yeah, if you're interested or you're curious about how your organization can use these technologies or anything like that, then do feel free to connect with us further. And just before we go, we've had some really nice comments come through. Not a lot of questions, but Navin, thank you very much. Great to see faces again. There's a lot of aspects around, it's really interesting about exploring that alter ego and connections, that freedom and self-discovery. So yeah, we've had some fantastic and very pleasant comments. So thank you everyone for sticking with us, and I look forward to catching you all very, very soon. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.